So today I get the privilege of introducing the Black Solidarity Think Tank Group. And over the past 5 development days, so 2 years, and I was thinking about that as the pandemic, the time that we've been through the pandemic, but they've been working before that. The BSTT has been crucial in curating an excellent group of guest speakers focused on racial equity, resulting in important conversations and reflections. They have also developed a framework to guide us towards systems and culture change on campus where Black lives are centered at all levels of our praxis. Today, they will share with us their thoughts over the last 2 years and how we continue to build individually and collectively. I personally want to thank all the members of the Black Solidarity Think Tank Group for their work, dedication, and commitment. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to start us off by pointing out our title for this session coming, and that is everybody's business, because it is. We normally hear it's nobody's business, but it is everybody's business. That's our title. And in this slide, you'll see words in this that really speak to the values of what we've been wanting to get to, and we know we're getting to. So we know that Guided Pathways requires a radical transformation of what we do, how we do it. It requires response and commitment to the work, to dismantling policies, procedures that continue perpetuating inequalities. So out of that work, one of our meetings, we sat there and we were discussing how do we move this sort of needle forward so that we are congruent with our roots. And I recall Dr. Kimberly and Dr. Helena having a very intriguing conversation that we were all on the edge of our seats, and really speaking to the need to be rooted in our identity as central, in our identity of activism, anti-racism work. And in that meeting, I asked, and Kate reminded me as I was talking to her about this yesterday, we needed to pause because at that moment in time, we began this journey to figure out how to make those changes real for us, how to put into practice this radical change. And the BSTT was formed at that very moment, knowing that we needed to do some heavy lifting and work. It was pretty impressive, this moment. We had to take a moment of just pausing and recognizing the importance of it. Right there and then, we knew that we needed to change the culture of the college by creating a framework that would be the sort of foundation and the work that we were doing through Pathways. We had to practice racial equity and anti-racist work, and that was the need that we needed to see take place. So the presentation today began with that fervent and desire to make sure that we were not just doing work that would not be lasting, but work that would be really being part of everything, how we looked at the college, the culture change, and so that it becomes everybody's business, that we're not going to ask that people sit idly by, but to really understand, because this work is going to, in moving forward, be our principle, the very thing that just, it's part of the fabric of the college, and it's what we know will need to take place in order for us to be successful in working with our students and having them be successful in getting through. So next slide. So today, and I hope I've done justice to that moment, because it was indeed a very deep and significant moment. So today, we're going to cover in this next few minutes the work that is rooted in the history of social justice and racial equity. We're going to talk about the nourished wisdom of the keynote speakers and how that all plays into the work and how that helped really provide some of that foundation work, spreading our branches through praxis. You know, how is this going to work? What our expectations are, is covering the forest transformation change, because that's what we know we need to do is, you know, be change for the sake of doing the good work. It is going to be part of who we are. So without further discussion, I want to bring in Sharon, who will begin our discussion and presentation. Mute.
Thank you, Ricardo. Now I'm unmuted.
You're very welcome.
And I can also do the slides. So I wanted to I'm working with the Rooted in History of Social Justice and Racial Equity. And here are two blasts from the past of Seattle Central College, what used to be Seattle Community College and then Seattle Central Community College. So 1969, we've had action where the Black Student Union staged a sit-in demanding equitable distribution of operating budget. Sound familiar? And also curriculum that would be, they wanted to make sure that curriculum was distributed across all three campuses. They didn't want this kind of tracking system where one campus which was central, was going to be only focused on developmental, remedial type of curriculum. So they did a sit-in to ask for that, and the result was there was a Black Studies curriculum that was established, and we also hired African-American faculty, administrators, and a trustee. Then in 1971, we had the Oriental Student Union follow the lead of the Black Student Union, and they also staged a sit-in that closed the admin building because they were protesting the lack of Asian American administrators. And we see in the photograph, you see the labels, the student Alan Sugiyama was addressing the crowd as they were doing in the midst of that protest. And the result of that sit-in was Asian American curriculum was added to the college, as well as Asian American faculty and administrators. And those are just two examples of how students have come together to raise their voices and say, hell no, okay, this is not right. We need to do something about this, and we're going to speak up. So that culture of activism has been a part of us for years. And over the years, the community of Seattle Central has engaged in a variety of causes. Okay, I need to move my own slides. And on the left, you'll see a list of some of the things that have come into play throughout the years. You know, the 60s and 70s, the anti-war movement, the women's rights movement, police brutality, 80s. I mean, it's been going on forever. LGBTQ rights. We have causes related to the Patriot Act that led to Islamophobia. We have speakers come in, students rise up. So just an example, just a sample of some of the issues that have come into play where not just students, but faculty, administrators have come together to say, no, we are not going to take this. We need to do something about this. And I've listed on the right-hand side some of the actions that we've had between the student-run newspaper and the Conciliation Project that was spearheaded by our beloved Dr. Tanya Pettiford-Waits. There's just many different ways that we have come together to say, no, this needs to change. We've had teach-ins, we've had rallies, we've had marches. There's journalism, there's letter writing, there's stuff happening in the classrooms, stuff happening in meeting rooms, stuff happening in the hallways. At the fountain, the Tsutakawa Fountain, we've had rallies to preserve that. We've had stuff happen in the library, and of course the South Lawn. And it's not just on our campus. We also have our students, our college community, come together and speak up down at City Hall and then at the state capitol. So we've been in this for a while. And so you might say, well, is this guided pathways thing going to be like some of these other initiatives that have come into our college campus, and then what happened to them? We say no, we don't see the guided pathways as such a thing, like a kind of fad in education. We see it as something that builds on previous work that we've done. We see it as being a movement towards sustainability, sustainable transformation. That's what we see this guided pathways as. And we see it as a movement that's going to center equity and care and bring some cohesion to all these the work that we've done in the past and work that's coming. We want to make sure that the work is cohesive, that it's centered, that it's grounded in one cause, which is equity and care. We don't want to have a repeat where we experience these siloed types of initiatives and projects, or even the disappearing initiatives and projects. We want to have the initiatives and projects be like, that was then, now we're in a movement, we're all in this together. This is truly everybody's business. And if we're all involved, we are all on the same page. We're doing work in different areas, but at the same time, we're also aware of what other folks are doing. And we know that we're all in this for a common cause. So that's what the Guided Pathways movement is hoping to accomplish through the framework, the foundation of the Black Solidarity think tank. And so I'm going to turn it over to Desiree, who will give you a little bit more detail on how the speakers that we've had so far connect with the foundation of Black Solidarity think tank.
Hi, everybody. I'm honored to join you as a member of the Black Solidarity think tank and a member of Seattle Central's community. I've got the easy job today to reacquaint everyone with the guest speakers that we've had through the Black Solidarity think tank and Guided Pathways. And we chose these speakers, and you can find all the information in the Canvas, the old Canvas course shells, the modules, where we highlight all the speakers that we've had and clips. And thank you, Michaela. And lots of information about them. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview in the order that they have appeared at our development days. And keep in mind that these speakers were all chosen very pointedly for their expertise, but as well as how they have this sort of big commitment to care and research and really like grounding us and holding us in this institutional thinking that we have to transform not just ourselves, but the spaces that we're in and the people that we work with, and how we think about all of that. So first, in the fall of 2020, we had Dr. Derrick Brooms, and Dr. Brooms' message to us focused on ways we see our work through the lens of Black males. As we do all this institutional work, this work in our jobs, this work in our lives, and this work out in the halls at Central. Dr. Brooms talked a lot about improving and transforming our learning environments, and also our praxis. For me, Dr. Brooms was particularly compelling is in our connection to Guided Pathways, because Central, you saw Sharon's part, Central has this huge legacy and all of this historical background for being at the forefront of this work and sort of focusing on how we try to see our institution as a way that certain groups of individuals, particularly Black males, experience our institution is vital. It's vital to data. It's vital to, how we look at how people move in our halls and what they experience through our faculty members and through staff. And Dr. Brooms really sort of encapsulated this for us. In the winter of 2021, we had Dr. Billy Sankofa Waters, and Dr. Waters grounded her work in Black feminism and critical race theory, and as did all of our speakers. Dr. Waters' Development Day work enlightened how we can deepen our understanding of identity, intersectionality, and positionality by engaging in personal reflection and poetic storytelling, which is the groundwork of BSTT. Her presentation was particularly powerful because she has such a personal connection to folks at Central, including Dr. Livingston and Dr. McCrae, and that was really cool to see how far back they go, and with dissertations. And so it's odd for me. It's odd to people I've cited like Dr. Waters to be physically be in our spaces is really cool, and to see the impact that Dr. Waters has had on people at Central. In the spring of 2021, we had Dr. Frank Harris III, and our choice to have Dr. Harris join us was to sort of deal with some great historical context around the concepts of equity and equity-mindedness. We throw these words around, and Dr. Harris sort of said, like, let's rein this back in a little bit and let's refocus on institutional equity, because a decade ago, this wasn't even a thing. And at some colleges and institutions, equity and equity-mindedness remains this elusive thing that we can't get hold of. So Dr. Harris talked about how some efforts institutionally are done piecemeal and offered ways that we could see impact and not scattered impact. And we know this well at Central. And we know that the work of BSTT and guided pathways, we're trying to daylight that and change that and transform. The fall of 2021, we had Nzinga Dugas, and Dugas addressed creating academic and social experiences that provide nurturing and necessary environments for Black students to succeed. And Dugas's work is particularly salient to Central and the work of Pathways because she laid out this work as being not just part of our work, but being this really personal thing to all of us, and personal in our lives and our experiences with students and our praxis, and personal to the work of our souls, like, how we feel better about our days and how we feel better about how we impact students and how we impact our colleagues, but what personal impact that has to us. You guys talked a lot about how campus leaders can and must learn transformative methods that directly address how to shift structural and systemic practices that negatively impact student success, again, which is another part of the role of BSTT. And FYI, Nzinga Dugas is an executive for the Umoja community, and the fall of 2022 will be the start of Seattle Central's first Umoja Scholars Program cohort, and we could not be more excited to have something like that at Central with our legacy. And the work of BSTT is really, we're holding on to this program tightly, and we're really, really excited about it. I will put that link in the chat after I finish this last one. So lastly, in the winter of 2022, we had Dr. Paul Gorski. And Gorski was actually a surprise to me because I had read some of his previous work and used it in my in my English shell for second language learners. So it was pretty amazing to put a face to some of the writing that I was reading. And Gorski met with BSTT prior to Development Day, and that conversation was so raw and so telling, and we really sort of understood how important our work was. We understood it a long time ago, but having someone who isn't necessarily from our experience sort of validate that work was big. And Gorski also personalized this work for us. And Dr. Gorski's presentation focused on racial battle fatigue and burnout, and also compassion fatigue, which we all are experiencing now, especially BIPOC faculty. And Gorski highlighted the growing body of research in demonstrating how people committed to racial justice and how people who are committed to racial justice are especially susceptible to experiences of burnout and battle fatigue. He spoke directly to how this anti-racism work impacts us and what happens in this process and what the price of exhaustion is, and how sometimes it creates a disconnect from our work and from the community when this work is so personal. Then we had a workshop by Dr. Gorski, which culminated in a discussion about how we sustain momentum and avoid all the things that cause like institutional harm and invisible harm. And, those are the speakers we've had so far. And I'll end this by saying that we really keep in mind speakers that we use for Development Day. And of course, I forgot my last slide. I see it on the screen, that connection between the speakers. We keep in mind that critical race theory is at the heart of so much of this work. And the slide sort of in a very bizarre PowerPoint way refocuses how that is the basis. CRT is the basis for a lot of this thinking, and how each of the speakers that we've had so far feed into that information as we go through this framework. So that's me. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to start my timer. I talk too much. So hi, everyone. Cal Litzel. I'm the he, him, we, us pronouns, acting vice president of student services, as well as the dean of student success. So before I go into this slide, I want to share a quote with you that really resonated with me as far as like who I feel like I am. So I was at a Guided Pathways summit, and Dr. Tia McNair shared this quote. So she wrote the book, From Equity Walk to Equity Talk. And the quote is, before you can transform systems and structures, you must do the people work first. So for me, the people work is something that I think I need to operationalize. For me, it really points to the healing pedagogy that's part of the BSTT framework. So what I'm going to share is my experience going through the process of applying the Black Solidarity Think Tanks framework. So what is this people work? That's something that I think oftentimes is not described enough. And what you have here is a passage from Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma. And I think it gets at it pretty darn well. So I'm going to read a few excerpts. Culture is how our bodies retain and reenact history. Change culture and you change lives. You also change the course of history. Many well-meaning social activists overlook this essential fact. They focus relentlessly on strategy, but strategy means nothing to our bodies and lizard brains. When strategy competes with culture, culture wins every time. This is one of the reasons why the most brilliant anti-white supremacy strategies in the world have failed to dislodge white body supremacy from our culture. So hopefully this resonated with you as well, as far as why this people work. You know, I don't believe it's an either or, it needs to be both and. I think Dr. McCrae and I came up with this other term, and. So as we think about all these changes that we know we need to make, what we can't forget is this people work, this culture building. And for us in student services, we're calling it the beloved community. So if you can move on to the next slide. So if I can take a step back, I just want to acknowledge, you know, the work of our much esteemed president, Dr. Yoshiko Hardin, for all the work she put in to lay the groundwork for this to happen. And even though I'm the one that's talking, I want everyone to know this is not Cal doing everything by himself. The student services staff have been so awesome as far as being vulnerable and willing to step up, courageous, and willing to, you know, be okay with tension and conflict and sharing it with me and others as far as like where we should grapple with some of these terms a little bit more. So this is not a Cal thing. This has been like a lot of folks. So Diane Coleman, Ricardo Leba Puebla, and Mai Mostad. So they all played a key role. Okay, so what you read here is the student services vision. So I'm going to read it real quick. This is where we landed on. It's a living statement. It can change. So in student services, we are a beloved community committed to learning, empowerment, and transformation of students and all those in our community. Through this, we honor our college's history of fighting for racial equity and social justice. So as you're hearing this, hopefully there's a few words that's kind of catching your attention. So hopefully beloved is one of those. So what I want to share with you is the process as far as how we got to this point. If I had enough time to do a poll, I would probably poll you. So hopefully, if you had to guess, you'll say like, you know, it might take you 1-2 meetings. So the process took an academic year. So this is the walk that I talk about with my staff as far as engaging in this collective, walking through this people process and engaging really, you know, with this framework, looking at the literature, our own experience, and really grappling with some of these terms. So I'll describe kind of what we did, just so you all have an idea as far as like the amount of work that it takes to engage in the culture building or the people process. So what we did was in this past summer, we had Dr. Derrick Brooms come by and meet with our student services councils. That's all the directors as well as our staff from our faculty counselor liaison. We met to talk about, for us in student services, why do we do our work? And if we look at the body or the culmination of our work, what are the results of that work? So after one meeting, we're like, well, we need a little bit more time to grapple with this, because if we want to draft a vision, we're still not too clear as far as our why and the purpose. So we asked Dr. Brooms to come back again for our fall department time. All the directors, deans, and the VP, we sat together and had another meeting. After that meeting, we met with Student Services Council again to kind of show our initial draft of the vision. After that meeting, we got some feedback. We came back again over winter quarter and met with all of Student Services at our department time. We got even more feedback. One of the things that we felt like we needed to really unpack was this term beloved. You know, for us, it's not a happy, happy, joy, joy all the time term. It's about going against the grain. I love that term that Dr. Hunt has shared. It's about going against the grain, being able to be in conflict with the other staff or other student while still being able to work it out. Conflict is okay. That's actually how we become better or do better. So for us, that was what we meant by beloved. So that was winter quarter. We shared it with all the student services, got even more feedback. In between that, I met with every department. We did readings, we read bell hooks. We listened to Francisca Maxime, a podcast with Bruce Perry. We read even more readings, more discussions, talked about our experience. And then finally, we landed out on this vision. Is it perfect? Maybe. Can it be better? Is it, and that's one of the things where I think that's part of the people process. It doesn't have to be perfect. Some of you might say, well, is that really a vision? I'll say, well, for me, it doesn't matter because I worked with my team on it. And that's what matters. So for me, that's the culture building. That's the people process. So that has been where, this morning we rolled it out again as far as this is our vision. I'm going to ask my staff to kind of put in their signature line. And then for this next year, we're going to keep refining it. We're going to look at operationalizing from this vision. Can we pull out some of the values? And then can we operationalize it? So I'm sharing that to say that this is for me, I always use the word, this never-ending process. It's a process of renewal. We can't think we hit this spot and it's done and everybody's going to be students are magically going to be better. So for us, this beloved community is this constant process of renewal, requires us to look at this framework that the BSTT has provided and really grappling with like tough problems of practice is what I like to call it. So that's the student services, acting DP stuff that I did. Sharon, if you can move into the next slide. I timed myself, I have 2 minutes. Okay, so when I stepped into the Dean of Student Success role, I took the same philosophy as far as culture building, systems and structure. And I said, okay, well, I have a trio running start advising underneath me. What do we need to do? The first thing was culture build. And what we grappled with, and it took about a year, was this question: what does it take to make a healthy community for students and staff? Then we pulled on the healing pedagogy literature. We, as a group, for every PDD, we as a group met together to answer that question. So for that group, what we did was a little different in that we actually identified what it actually looks like at the ground level, and that's the bullet points. And then from the bullet points, what we did was we extracted the value kind of statement. So that took about a year to create this document. It's actually 2 pages, single spaced. If you want to see it, I can share it with all of you. And this is a document where for every new staff that we onboarded or hired as far as like student success, I would say, welcome to the Central family and the student success family. Here's a document that we wrote. I need you to make time to read it because it's important as far as how we will work together. And it's going to be how we hold each other accountable because it starts with us. So that's one document. So that's the first year. And Sharon, if you can move to the next slide. So the second year, what we did was we pulled on Dr. Frank Harris and Luke Wood's literature as far as they had an awesome webinar around the 7 equity-minded practices. For me, there were themes. So we spent the whole year saying, okay, what is equity-minded advising for all 3 areas? Okay, my time is up, but I'm going to keep going. Sorry, y'all put me first. So we answered that question as far as student success. So we drafted this document and said, okay, here are the themes. What are our current practices and what are our future practices? So that's not what you're seeing here. We spent a year drafting that document. And after that year, what we did was in my past meeting with my directors and a recent meeting with my directors, we said, okay, what's the next step that we need to take? So we took that document and created this one that says, okay, if these are the practices that we want to implement, how are we going to assess ourselves to say if we're actually accomplishing what we want to accomplish? So this is the people work. As far as the student success work, that's roughly 2 years to do the culture building, and it still needs to be built. The other piece that I didn't really get a chance to talk about is there's this awesome mural. Having imagery with a story behind it. I keep asking my staff, share the story. It talks about the Oriental Student Club. So hopefully this gives you all a lot of ideas as far as like how you can take the Black Solidarity think tank and apply it to your work, because it's not one size fits all. There's no silver bullet, but the key is You know, I told my staff this. There's no point where we're ready. We just have to do it now. So when it comes to this culture building work, because if we don't, if you can move to the next slide, Sharon. I'm sorry, BSCT, I'm almost done. If we don't, this is going to be what's going to happen. And I love this quote by Baldwin. I can't believe what you say, that the song goes, because I see what you do. Because if we don't align what the inner self, as far as like our work, our actions with our heart and mind, I worked with students that's been disenfranchised, marginalized, and oppressed. They will see through what you say and dissect your actions to say, okay, well, you may have been able to help me graduate and get me the service, but at the end of the day, I don't trust you. So they're not any better off. So I love this quote. Sorry, BSCT, I took too much time. I'm going to pass it on to the next one.
Thanks, Cal. I'll try to be brief so the other folks can go. So I just would like to talk about how the counseling faculty here at Seattle Central infuse some of the work that the BSTT has done into our counseling work. So one of the things that happened last spring was that we participated in a professional development activity called BRIC, Book Reading Inquiry Circle. And this activity was initiated by one of our counselors, Ruby Hansra, and she brought us all along because we had been talking since January about how to infuse intersectionality and critical race theory in a more meaningful way throughout our work with students, including our teaching, our workshops, and more importantly, our counseling practices. As a group, we conducted formal conversations, like I said, since January. We've been having these conversations for a long time. Next slide. However, before we really sat down and had real deep conversations, we had to decide on some articles, right? So I was asked to initiate a couple of articles, which I did. And these were some of the articles that I selected as a starting point for us to have these conversations that we were going to have. And we read these articles to inform what actions we would take to dismantle those inequities in our classes, in our workshops, and most importantly, in our counseling practices. So the first article we read was Geraldo Payne's The Role of Critical Race Theory in Education. And just a brief synopsis, this article analyzes the role of race and racism in perpetuating social disparities between dominant and marginalized groups. And the purpose, understanding that the purpose of CRT is always to unearth what is taken for granted when analyzing race and privilege, as well as the profound patterns of exclusion that exist in society. The next article was Other Mothering as a Framework for Understanding African-American Students' Definitions of Student-Centered Faculty. So in this qualitative study, African-American students attending a predominantly white institution, PWI, were interviewed to understand their definitions of student-centered faculty. The results suggest that a tradition of education within the African community called Other Mothering provides a useful framework for conceptualizing the unique needs and expectations of some of our African-American students. We also read Tara Yasso's article, Dr. Tara Yasso's article, like many of you in the room have already, Whose Culture Has Capital, a critical race theory discussion of community cultural wealth. And Dr. Yasso's work is rooted in CRT and emphasizes success over challenges and focuses on how BIPOC individuals and communities overcome these challenges. Critical CCW, Community Cultural Wealth, is about us as faculty, staff, students, and administrators understanding the mechanisms of success for our students of color, our BIPOC communities in the classroom and society at large. So when I say for us, it's about us understanding success, one of the ways we go about doing that is instead of asking questions like, why do so many Black males leave post-secondary education? We might want to have a reframe and say, So why Black males? So how do or why do Black males persist in post-secondary education despite all their known barriers, right? So why do Black males persist in post-secondary education despite all known barriers is a accomplishment type of question, as opposed to asking why do so many Black students leave post-secondary education, which is a deficit prompt. And finally, the last article we read was Franklin VP's Introduction to Cultural Capital in the African-American and African-American Education. And in this article, it examined the role African-Americans have in providing financial and other material resources for support of public and private schools that are often in the Black and Brown communities. And what it looked at is how over the last 3 decades, there have been regular reports in books and magazines and newspaper articles describing the precarious financial conditions for urban public schools systems with the majority of African-American and other non-white student populations not receiving equitable funding. So this was a really helpful article. Next slide, Sharon. So our dialogue and discussion centered on what actions we were going to take to dismantle inequities in our classes, workshops, and counseling. So a couple of highlights that came out of those discussions. So for example, the redesign of class activities. So one of the counselors, I'm not going to call out names, redesigned a classroom activity for his HDC 103 class. And according to the counselor, after these readings and deep reflective conversations with his counseling colleagues, he has changed some of his class exercises. For example, he will now be comparing the exercise of a privilege walk to a community cultural wealth walk, and with the outcome of helping students highlight the harm systems of evaluation can produce and question of how they inform what future folks are working towards. Another one was a counselor incorporated more qualitative narrative approaches to assessment that highlight cultural wealth. So Dr. Smith, Brian Smith, says after these conversation, he now includes some of the articles that we read in his HDC 102 course with the module having to do with Introduction to American Universities. According to Dr. Smith, students will give this will give students the needed alternative readings of the liberal construct of the triumph of the American university. According to Brian, with respect to his HDC 100 career planning and personal evaluation class, Brian stated that he is better attuned to a critical perspective on a trait psychology psychometric, doesn't that sound like a doctor, assessment models of career psychology. And also, he will now include more qualitative narrative approaches to assessment that highlight cultural wealth, taken right from CRT's tenet of counter storytelling. Ruby designed a new unit on CRT, understanding power, building trust between providers and patients. And the goal of this class was to transform the relationship between race, racism, and power. And she incorporated each tenet of CRT and worked with her students in the Allied Health program. She taught this to the students in Allied Health and wanted them to expand on sections, or she wanted to expand on sections on microaggressions and intersectionality to help those students deepen their understanding in healthcare and their understanding of how race and racism affects not just them as students, but also the clients that the patients that they provide. And for me, the discussion and dialogue that we had around race and equity has informed a rewording of my course description for my AME 201 class. And my description is now more explicit and makes clear the objectives and outcomes for the class, which conceptualizes community cultural wealth as a critical race theory. So, we had some reflections going on as well, but for the sake of time, I just want to wrap up. I think the one reflection that I'll give is just Ruby's reflection, and her wrap up was this was the wonderful unintended consequence of coming together and using the Seattle Central's framework for to discuss race and racism. Was the unintended consequence of this activity was the authentic team building. This was especially welcome as building relationship with our colleagues became harder with COVID and working from home measures. And she says, I was grateful for these deep, meaningful conversations that help our team connect and get to know each other in a heartfelt way. And with that, I'm going to pass the torch. Yeah.
Sorry, can I interrupt for a minute? So it is 1:50, and I don't know if you all saw the chat message from Michaela. So the presentation is going to go beyond 1:50. So we're going to take a quick pause if people want to go to the other workshops, but the BSTT will continue here. And Michaela says, thank you all for your understanding and flexibility. And
should I start? I always get stage fright. I get the butterflies before I teach. So the less people, the better. I'm just gonna watch that number drop. All right. I wanted to show an example of work that faculty have taken on their own initiative that is anti-racist, curricular, institutionalization, etc. I'm mostly going to read. I'm going to try to do it rather slow. But because I'm in composition faculty, I wanted to show some concrete examples of what this kind of work looks like on the ground. I'm going to talk a little bit about a collaborative project undertaken by faculty in library and in English on their own initiative as an example of what it looks like when workers take on anti-racist work as everybody's business. Altogether, this represents the work of over a dozen faculty members. And for the record, I had nothing to do with it besides cheerleading from the sidelines, but I'm really excited about what they've been doing. And it's an amazing example of how workers can work collectively to institutionalize the work that we know is important. Next slide, please. So for a little background, over the last year and a half, 2 years, I'm not sure of the timeline. I don't know time anymore. A team of faculty from all 3 colleges worked on revising district-wide English 102 outcomes to center equity and anti-racism into the course outline. Together, they revised the outcomes to focus on centering marginalized voices, interrogating how power and authority work in research and sources, and also to center student inquiry rather than just simply gathering and repeating information. So simultaneously, next slide, please. Simultaneously, a number of us in English had been reading and thinking about a project put together by a collective of Black feminist scholars, activists called Cite Black Women, which calls on academics to disrupt the canon, upturn the erasures of history, and give credit where credit is due. Next slide, please. The Cite Black Women Collective put together a whole movement, which includes a website, a podcast, a manifesto. Next slide, please, for the manifesto, which not only details the history of erasure that they mentioned, but also outlines their whole praxis. It's a great statement. I have my students read it in 102. So as you probably know, English 102 involves research-based writing, and that includes teaching citation practices. So since inspired by Cite Black Women, English faculty members were thinking about the ethics and pedagogy of citation, we ended up with outcomes like this. Next slide. Understand how power shapes which sources and voices are amplified, and how to rebalance power by incorporating marginalized sources and voices into students' compositions. Now, I know we're in a difficult moment as workers in this institution, but seriously, when I show this outcome to friends at other institutions, their jaws hit the floor. No one gets to do this kind of stuff at their work at other institutions. And I say that because I know we feel really ground down right now, but it's important to remember our collective power and joy as educators and faculty workers and what we get to do when we're working together. We get to do stuff at Central that no one else gets to do, which is part of why thinking and talking about this project gets me so excited. So now we have these outcomes for a class that is a requirement for a majority of transfer students and many Prof Tech students as well, right? I was going to make up a number of how many students have to take English 102, but it was going to be a lie, and I will not. I don't have a source to cite. So a lot of students take English 102. It's almost universal, right? So meanwhile, another group of faculty from English and library put together, this came out of another brick, right? Which was a Cite Black Women module. Next slide, please. To show what this Cite Black Women praxis would look like in the classroom. So they put together lesson plans, resources, and materials that would center anti-racist work rather than do a cleanup job through an equity lens once things are done. You know what I'm saying? So they would start from the praxis rather than check it at the end. So this is just this is part of the module that they built. This is internal on English, and it has like, Sharon, could you do the next slide? It's the librarian's lesson plans. If you've ever, you can't read it. But anyway, the librarian's lesson plans are always very tidy and very awesome. So it's got lesson plans, it's got videos, it's got assignments, all of the ways in which different faculty members have like kind of taken this project and put it into their classrooms. So now we have the theory piece, the curricular piece, and the classroom piece, right? And then we also have the unsexiest but kind of weirdly exciting piece of all, which is the assessment piece, right? So in English, we were tasked with developing an assessment project to identify one of the new outcomes to measure by the end of the year. So guess which outcome is getting assessed, right? Next slide. Oh wait, no, I didn't put that in. It's the old one with the circle. Yeah, that one. So we're measuring this outcome in every English 102 class, and seeing and helping our students achieve it, right? Which is our jobs. So that's it for me. I know we're running out of time. We have run out of time. I'm going to put this, the last here is the shout out to all the faculty who worked on this project. And it also includes all English faculty who are teaching English 102. Thank you. I'm going to put the link to Cite Black Women in the chat again.
Great. Thanks. Hard to follow all of these hard acts. Elena, you're so great, even though you say you get stage fright. That was awesome. So thanks to all the diehard fans who are still in the room. I'm Kate Krieg and work on guided pathways at the college. And I can't overstate how important it was that Dr. McRae and Elena formed the BSTT to ensure that guided pathways is grounded in equity and an identity framework. And other colleges admire what we've done and are trying to replicate some of our work. And I'm incredibly proud of its influence on guided pathways. Guided Pathways was not focused on equity in what I call Guided Pathways 1.0. In fact, back in the day, I spearheaded a report for the district that said Guided Pathways wasn't going to fly because it wasn't centered in equity. So I get the skepticism, and we wouldn't be Central without the skepticism when you and we have seen so many one-off initiatives or funding that at its best doesn't make an impact, or at worst harms our most marginalized or minoritized students. I would say Guided Pathways can be a movement that moves away from one-off initiatives and silo busts and infuses equity and is sustained, as Sharon said, partly because I'm seeing it. But I also think that it will only continue if people continue to stay involved or get involved and influence its implementation, like BSTT has. As you heard Dr. Yoshiko say this morning, we have arrived at Guided Pathways 2.0. And to help us make that a reality, the BSTT and Student Voices work is the foundation of Guided Pathways. I see BSTT's framework as our compass for Guided Pathways work and needing to infuse all of our work. The BSTT mission that Sharon showed at the beginning of this presentation very much aligns with the guided pathways principle that this work requires urgent, radical, transformational change that engages employees and students in systemic lasting change. So at Central specifically, how are we walking the walk? A la Paul Gorski. Next slide, please. Well, first, thank you to the 11 work groups on campus, or about 50 employees who are using the BSTT framework to center racial equity in dialogue and decision-making to guide their thinking and approach and implementation of any changes. And more than 20 additional employees have been exposed to the framework through the mapping project. And this doesn't even include employees who have experienced the approach in the framework through accreditation or CCC plus work or other work like you've heard mentioned. So I wanted to just give a couple of examples about how how folks are using the BSTT framework in the work. So in the mapping project, all the departments that have participated have been exposed to the framework's approach when they've looked at their course and program data. We give the group some initial questions from the framework to think about when they're looking at course and program data. And then after each group is presented the full approach, and mapping leads facilitate some discussion to help people practice thinking through the mindset of that. The first year experience work group, one of the main tasks of this work group is to reimagine and revamp new student orientation from concept to implementation. And this group read Payne Geraldo's article, The Role of Critical Race Theory in Education. And then I introduced the framework once with the whole group and then more in depth with the leads at a separate time. And together we came up with a way for the group to start practicing the approach and embracing the mindset that comes along with that. And they're doing a really great job. They want to start every meeting with the CRT tenets and eventually progress to having the tenets just automatically inform the decisions. And there's going to be a shared document for brainstorming and sharing feedback from students. Particularly for this group at this stage, they'll start focusing on the CRT tenets and looking at new student orientation website and how it aligns or doesn't with the tenets. And they're using the tenets of CRT for them to start discussing might be missing from the website. And one of the questions in the framework that the group is starting with is, what actions can we take to dismantle inequities at our institution through us reimagining and revamping new student orientation? And the leads and the members, you could tell, like, after they were exposed to the framework, like a lot of groups that I've experienced and seen, it generates discussion. And that's how this framework comes alive. It's not something that is like a checklist. It's not a handbook. It's not a worksheet. It comes to life when people wrestle with it and try it on and use it as a different approach so that we can break the status quo. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat what we have done in the past. And I guess I'll end by just saying that in the fall, the BSTT framework will be in the equity and practice module. So that's a Canvas shell that everybody can have access to, and you can watch and listen to a lot of the people that you've seen here, the panelists of the BSTT, go through a sort of podcast walking you through the framework in more depth. So that's really exciting. And it's the more in-depth rollout that you're seeing the preview for right now. So that's the goal for fall.
With that, I have the last slide. So yes, so for fall, the expectation is that this will be rolling out and that we are going to expect that the campus become very familiar with it so that we begin to putting all of this into practice. And what will that look like? So as a way of saying thank you and ending our session, we have a reflection for you to consider, to ponder, to reflect, and how does any of this resonate with your work, the work that you're already doing individually or collectively in your departments, in your areas. So how does it resonate? And secondly is, as we move towards more transparency and transformation at our institution, what are some of the areas where this framework can guide us to walk the talk of racial equity and care? One of the things that has been in my mind throughout our working on this is that we are here to not have the status quo. And if there are things in your reflection that you can send our way that can disrupt the way in which we do things so that we can do them differently, so that this framework is practiced and used and impacting the work that we do in the college as a whole, please do share. I thank the group. There's so many of us who've been involved, and we appreciate it. So keep this in mind, and I'll stop there and say thank you so very much from the Black Solidarity Think Tank. We've enjoyed doing the work, and we definitely had a lot of conversations around this and making it real. So, hey, who's next? Who would like to bring closure?
I think that might be me. So thank you, everyone. And thank you all so much for doing this. I think this was such a great way to show what it looks like. And I've been communicating with a colleague about, oh, we can do this and we can do that. And so we will be contacting you all for more info. And thank you everyone for being flexible and staying. And so I think at this point, people will just move to their own workshops. And we look forward to the podcast and everything else that's happening next year with the Black Solidarity Think Tank. Thank you.